Scripture for the message is 1 Peter 3, verses 1 through 7. Likewise, wives, being subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, putting on of gold jewelry, or clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with an imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is in God's sight very precious. This is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, as they submitted to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You are her children, if you do doing good, and do not fear anything that is intimidating. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. What do people value in our own character? This is a question for self-reflection, I think, not to try to come up with an answer on how to please people, but instead to kind of ask things like, how are we adorning our lives? What are we showing other people that we value? We sometimes have to ask the questions, and do we spend too much time on outward things that ultimately don't matter, getting ourselves noticed? Or do we focus on the inner things within the heart, which only God can see fully? Jesus never cared about outward appearances, but he's always called us to adorn the inner person of the heart. That's what Peter is talking about in our text this morning, as he now turns to submitting to social institutions, and particularly families, on account of the Lord. Now, just like last week when we were doing the economic ones and we said instead of employer and employee, we had master and slave back then, so there's a great difference between then and now, even though it still was families and we still used the word husbands and wives back then just like we do now. But in that day and age, the wife and the children were more closely considered as possessions of the man. And certainly is not the case today. And if someone tries to act that way, they'll find out soon that it doesn't work that way today. But even within that framework of the way things were back then, what we're told is the wives and the husbands could still provide a witness to Jesus, and his light could shine through the way that they related to one another. Peter starts with the wives and he says, even if your husband is not serving the Lord, the wife can still serve the Lord by serving the husband as part of Jesus' work in saving him. Now, he says this will not happen by words. It's without a word, and yet it's going to be, well, and you know, what is saying using words? That would be telling him what he's doing wrong and how he has to change and get his life, you know, together if he wants to do something differently. That would be the words. But instead of that, Peter says she will win him by pure conduct. Now, a couple weeks ago, we talked about planting spiritual seeds, and that's part of what Peter's referring to here when he says that if the wife does this, even if the man isn't serving the Lord, but if the wife is, it says that when he observes her pure conduct in fear, and that would be on the day of the Lord, when he observes that conduct, he is gained, is literally the word that's used there. He's saved, he comes to understand that witness that the wife was making. Now, since we don't have to repeat that sowing this, planting the spiritual seeds from 2 weeks ago, instead we ask the question with the text here, how can the wife's conduct be pure? And Peter says it's not by focusing on outward things, getting noticed for the hair or jewelry or clothing that she's wearing, but by adorning the hidden person heart. And if she does so, this said that it results in a meek and quiet spirit. Now, meekness here is not being timid, or the popular term is a doormat. You know, these days it has nothing to do with that, because it says that when she is doing good, she's not fearing any intimidation at all. Now, again, back in that day and age, if the men were considering the wives as possessions, then there's certainly a strong temptation to be tyrannical, about the way the husband's trying to lead the wife. And so intimidation was a very real and present danger there. But she's able to serve the Lord and to now serve this husband without fear, without having any intimidation, because she's doing it for the Lord's sake. And then quiet, again, refers to not just complaining and using words to trying to change the husband, but letting her behavior do the talking. And so this submission that he mentions at first is for the Lord's sake, because Jesus wants a witness within family life, the human institution that we're talking about, just as it is at the time even, not just as it should be or how it should change into something later. Now, husbands didn't get it off the hook. We're told that they are to dwell together with their wives according to spiritual knowledge. They should see their wives not as a possession, even though that was what was common in that day and age, but it says assigning honor to them as fellow inheritors of the grace of life. So even though the world around them thought of wives as possessions, a Christian husband was supposed to say, here is someone that Jesus loves just as much as he loves me. She's a fellow inheritor of the glory and grace of life. Otherwise, Peter goes on to add, how could you even be praying to the Lord? If you're always thinking of your wife in this wrong way, that will hinder your prayers, he says. And so have this different view of her in the Lord, and then your prayers won't be hindered at all. So even how families were back then, which was a lot different from now, it didn't make it impossible for husbands and wives to shine Jesus' light through their relationship. It was by putting more emphasis on the hidden person of the heart that people could potentially see a deeper and more valuable character that pleases God. Now, I said potentially because that spouse that's not serving the Lord or other people outside of the family are not necessarily here and now going to see that witness clearly. But if we do make that witness, whether husband or wife, Peter is telling us certainly they will see it on the day of the Lord. And so the witness will not be in vain. It will be seen eventually. This is what Dawn Adams discovered. She's been providing a witness to her husband during a struggling marriage. She even decided spiritually after prayer that she would serve him by agreeing for them and their 8-year-old son Harrison to move to South Carolina, even though that was 1,000 miles from her own family. Well, as things went, 9 months later, the husband left. What did I do wrong? Dawn was asking herself. Was it wrong to move here for spiritual reasons? And while she's trying to ask these inward questions, her mind's having to be focused so much on outward things. Bills are piling up. What would her future look like without a husband in it? She had found a cheaper place for her and Harrison to live. It was about 15 miles away, and it was just a tiny 3-room cottage. So a far cry from a regular, larger home. On moving day, she had borrowed an old pickup truck that seemed like it was almost broken down from a co-worker. And yet she had no tarp to cover her belongings across the back. And so here it was on moving day, and they were looking outside the home that they were leaving, watching a downpour occur, as it just rained and rained in the morning. She said as she fought back her tears, she thought it had been raining the day my husband left. And as far as I was concerned, it had been raining ever since. Well, around noon, the rain finally stopped, and she told Harrison they had to pack the truck in a hurry. They put in the table and the chairs, and they put Harrison's bed in, a little day couch that she would sleep on, and then had to wedge in whatever cartons and lamps and anything else just to fit in whatever they could. The sky was still dark, though, and Dawn remembered as she looked up to it that how her dad had always taught her to pray at times like this. But she said, now the words stuck in my throat. She still went to church, but she prayed so hard for her marriage to be saved by God that she said, I found it harder and harder to believe that God could do anything. And so that's probably why her prayer at this time came out like this: Dear Lord, is it never going to stop raining on me? So they got completely packed and started driving down the road, the 15 miles, and the wind picked up. Thunk, something in the back. It heard. She looked around and a chair had fallen over on top of a lamp. So she pulled off the side of the road and left the engine running, and she tried to shove the chair back in place and pack it a little more tightly. But then the truck's engine sputtered and stalled. She tried again and again to get it to start, but it did not. My fear and exhaustion were too much. I buried my face in my arms on the steering wheel. And then suddenly she was surprised to feel that 8-year-old Harrison had put his hand in hers, as he always did when they prayed together. Please, Lord, help us, she found herself saying over and over again. When I sat up, I felt more peaceful than I had felt in months. She turned the key and the truck started this time. But ahead of them, there was a dark curtain of rain that stretched all across the landscape. We're driving right into it, Harrison said. The rain got nearer and nearer. It was only 2 car lengths in front of them, and they were bracing themselves to hear the heavy rain hitting upon this old pickup truck. Only it didn't. Mommy, why don't we get to where the rain is? Dawn looked around, and it was raining in front of them, and she could see in the rearview mirror it was raining behind them. She could see houses that it was pouring down on the roof on the sides of the road, and there was cars coming the other way. They had their wipers on and were shooting up water that was on the road. But she said, I didn't even have to put my windshield wipers on. Mommy, it's raining everywhere but where we are. Dawn finally realized, son, I think God is going out of his way to show us that it has stopped raining on us. That night, after all was unpacked and Harrison was in bed, she said, a sense of peace filled me. I no longer feared the future. Life's difficulties would not go away, but neither would God's presence and his love. Dawn was adorning the inner person of the heart. What do people value in our character? Do they see us spending time simply trying to be noticed? Or do we focus on the hidden things that only God can see fully? No matter what circumstances and how hard they are that come up in our lives, we can always witness to the true things that abide: Jesus' presence and his everlasting love.